I know it's a bit tricky when we're online like this, but perhaps even more important to consider such things as posture and to ask the simplest questions. I always say to people, there aren't any stupid questions. There may be some stupid answers and maybe questions that I can't answer, but your questions are not stupid, they're very important. So. Okay, so just give yourself plenty of time, as always, to settle in, and just think about how you're doing this movement, and what's involved to enable you to do this. We're looking for a very loose quality. You want to imagine that if you were standing outside and a very light breeze touched one shoulder, you would just move with it. You would yield to it. So this is not simply acquiescence, if you see what I mean. What it would actually be is, if it was a hard push, if somebody came along and pushed me on my shoulder, I wouldn't just give way to it, because eventually I would fall over. Well, essentially what would happen is I would turn, but I would also try and take the movement down into the ground. So you want to allow whatever forces are acting on you, and this is obviously going to be the pull of gravity, to work downwards through your body. And so questions of alignment, and also related to that, how we're moving, become really important. And I would really recommend this exercise as one where we can begin to just explore those ideas a little bit. By the time you get to, I don't know, parting the wild horse's mane and so on and so forth, you go, oh God, what's going on? It's very easy to lose what's going on in the whole of your body. This is true for everybody, by the way. This is not just you or beginners or anything like that. These are part and parcel of the ongoing practice. So lining yourself up with the pull of gravity really works on two planes. From the front here, say, I want to stand so that that line down there is reasonably straight. Think of your body as being like a drain pipe. If you've got a drain pipe on the side of your house and it's kind of twisted over, then here is where you're going to find a blockage. Normally they have a little bend at the end, and that's it. So shoulders, hips, feet, all in line. There's some variation in that in terms of the width of your step. It's about what's comfortable for you. And as I've said to most of you, if not all of you at some point recently, a memory of how it can feel can be a useful guide. You've hopefully all had those times when you think, hey, yeah, this is it. And then it gets lost, of course. But that memory can get filed away and drawn on, well, at least as immediately, if not more immediately, than an external image. So that's useful. And then the second plane is front to back. And again, what we want to think about here is, if, say, for instance, I'm leaning backwards, obviously that's extreme, then I'm going to get pulled over. I'm going to tighten up somewhere if I do that. So roughly speaking, if I'm not moving, my arm is hanging down from my shoulder, going past my hip, and middle ring or little finger pointing towards my ankle bone, which may give you a feeling of sort of being hunched over. And this is another thing to consider. This is a generalization, but mostly I think we lean back. But even if we don't, we all hold a characteristic posture. And when we come out of that posture, it feels wrong. So the example I often give to you is if you're on a boat for an hour or so, and then you're going up and down on the waves, and then you come back to dry land, and the first few minutes you're walking like that, because it takes you a little while to adjust to the fact that the ground isn't going up and down like the waves were. So if that can happen in the space of an hour or two, then years spent, I don't know, maybe holding your head on one side is very common. Standing with your weight on one leg like that and throwing the pelvis out is very common. But when you make the adjustments, then it will feel as though you're out of posture. We all believe that how we're standing is in line, unless there's something extreme going on. And so this brings in the whole thing about awareness and just slowly changing what you're doing, giving your mind as well as your body time to adjust to what is going on and to become comfortable with what is going on. Your body needs to condition. The muscles in your legs, for instance, the thigh muscles in particular, need to condition so that this posture can be held without having to strain, because as soon as you start to strain, the pressure will go back on your knees. And the combination of all of this simply allows our center of gravity to drop. And the lower our center of gravity, the more stable we are, and the less strain there is above the center of gravity. Remember the heavy box. If I give you a heavy box, I say lift it up above your head, you'll start wobbling around and you'll lean back and your shoulders will get tight. And if you simply lower that box down, as soon as it gets lower than your shoulders, the shoulders will start to relax again. So the lower you can drop your center of gravity by releasing, then the more you'll be able to experience that kind of loose quality in your body. And that too is aided by muscles like the thigh muscles, the calf muscles, getting to a point where they can be in this position without tightening up. When they tighten up, it's like the drain pipe has become blocked. So all of these things are part and parcel of our ongoing practice. I wouldn't claim to have this correct, and it's something that these are the sort of thoughts I go through when I start to train in the mornings. My starting point ish. Sometimes I'm standing there and I'm swinging my arms around, and then I think, hold on, what's going on? It doesn't feel right, because I've just woken up and maybe I'm thinking about the day ahead or something like that. But it's like we receive these little messages from our body. It's like, oh, my back feels tight. Oh, hold on, I haven't, and so on and so forth. So getting used to this feeling of scanning through your body, of listening to your body. How is it moving? Does it feel right? Or have you got some kind of, is there something sticking somewhere? It's like, if you went to open your front door and it's stuck, you think, oh no, there's something wrong here. And you take a look, is there something sticking in it or something like that? And the same is true of our bodies. We want to be able to respond to that. So this is an important process to go through. This is a good exercise to do that with, because it's very simple, and also because the quality of the movement is very distinctive. It's a very loose, rhythmic feeling. Because it's a little bit faster, your body will slip into that rhythm and that flow more quickly than when we're moving slowly. I think if you talk to somebody who drums or plays some kind of percussion instrument, it's much harder to hold a rhythm, to hold a beat slowly than it is done quick. Now I go 1, 2, 3, 4, but I can go 1, 2, and I missed it. So it's the the art of a percussionist is often is sometimes seen as being who can play the slowest and still maintain the rhythm. And the same is true in Tai Chi. We establish the ideas here in this lovely simple exercise. We can also apply here things like the images of moving through water to get that slightly stronger, more connected feel that we're also looking for. When it all comes together, there is again that very distinctive feeling. When we lose that distinctive feeling, the message from your body is come back. Come back to an awareness of your feet, of your legs, check, for instance. And sometimes I find myself standing in classes and I'm saying to people, check your feet, and people are going, yeah, okay, my feet. And you know, really what we want to do, if the teacher says, check your feet, you know, oh yeah, they're there, it's fine. So, sort of thing, look down and see them. Do your feet match the feeling you're getting from them? And then sometimes I can be standing there and I'm saying to people, yeah, check your feet, folks, check your feet. Oh blimey, I'm because my attention is out there. So then you're turning from the middle of your body. So if I come a bit closer, I want you to see what happens if my knees are a bit stiff and my hips are a bit stiff, and I turn from the middle of my, look what my legs are doing. See how they're twisting up. This is quite normal, of course. You know, if you're standing in a supermarket at a shelf and you take something off the shelf and then you turn around, you get something off the shelf behind you, your feet move with you. You don't do, oh, well, I'm going to get a tin of beans. It doesn't happen. You don't have to think about it. So it's quite natural, quite normal, and quite desirable for your legs to have a connection to the center of the body. But this movement is one that we want to gradually eliminate. And the way that we do that, this takes a lot of practice and a great deal of thought and a great deal of care. When I turn this way, this knee has twisted in. So what I want to gradually train myself to do is to rotate the knee outwards. Or so one of my teachers says that what you do is you turn, and then what you do is you push the knee forwards. I prefer rotating outwards. I don't, because we don't want the knee to go too far forwards, but both have the same effect. I do it at the same time as I turn, and therefore it appears to stay still. It's like watching somebody in a river. They're swimming up the river at the same speed they're being pushed back. It looks like they're staying still. So, and this isn't one to take on board very, very gradually. The muscles, the abductor muscles on the outside of the leg need to condition to do that. The adductor muscles on the inside need to stretch out a little bit, and so on and so forth. Your knees have a little bit of sideways flexibility, by the way, so you know there may well always be a little bit of movement there. It shouldn't be a problem. And when you look down at your knees, or when you look down your body, you should be able to see your toes poking out beyond your knees. I've just noticed, actually, interestingly, and this wasn't deliberate, but actually I would normally, there I would expect to have my weight. I appear to be there today. That's an interesting thought. If I'd noticed this earlier, I would have spent some time thinking about why. Maybe my lower back, actually, but that's fine. I'm not trying to show off or compete or anything like that. I think over the session I'll probably settle in more. I've just been sitting doing some stuff at the computer, so you know, it might take my body a little bit of extra time. You can get to a point where you can trust your body to find the right posture mostly, but always check. And think about those lines. So there are no straight lines in your body. But if you think of parallel lines, shoulders to hips to ankles, crown of your head to your nose, to your navel, and arriving halfway between your feet, in that plane, and as I said before, down shoulders to hips in that plane. It gives you a model to work with. They don't exist, so don't think of them as being sort of like precise geometric lines. They're not, but they're like the grid lines that you get on maps. You know, if you get an ordnance survey map of a place and it's got these square grids on, and if you went to that place with the map and looked for the square grids, you wouldn't find them. They don't exist, and yet they can actually help you to navigate. So we've gradually become a little bit more aware of what's happening within that inner landscape of the body. Now, turn your hands palm out and notice what happens as you raise them up. This posture encourages the movement from the center of your body. So you're more likely to twist up the back if you do this and not turn in the center, because you're probably trying to move the arms too much. But as soon as we come to this, it seems to encourage a movement in the middle of the body. The problem is it can also distract. You know, we can be like this, nice posture, and as soon as the arms come in, it's like back to that. So, and I think I've said before that in the first instance, thinking about this analogy of exploring a landscape, if you arrive somewhere, you might find a spot where you can look out over that landscape a little bit more easily, and just get a general sense for, oh yeah, come, the river's over there, there's a house over there, and just to get your bearings. And so in this initial stage of the session, that also begins to happen, and you want that to stay in the back of your awareness. So whatever details you add on are always conducive with that overall view of the landscape. So now this exercise, if you can leave your knees soft, and then do so, but just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. Just a little heels and toes staying on the ground. So the pivot point is your ankles. I tend, well, we all tend, I think, to sort of think of these things and describe these different factors in linear terms. You align, you root down, blah, 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 blah. But the truth is that they're much more interactive than that. If you can get this movement so that you're not going too far and sort of straining, then you're more likely to be able to just soften in your hips and your knees. But at the same time, softening in your hips and your knees helps you to drop your weight, so you're more likely to be able to do this without stumbling around and losing your stability and so on. So they feed off each other. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, but rather think of this as a circle with all those different factors joining in the middle. In practice, we will sometimes focus on a particular aspect, especially when we identify, oh, hold on, as I did, oh, my knees going out of line because I'm turning in my center. I had to work on that. And we all identify things to work on. But two things with this exercise that are really important. I mean, there's other things as well, we know. But one is not to go too far. And the other is to find that midpoint where you feel that your weight is going down through your legs. Later, we will consider how that works with those grid lines and so on and so forth. But to start off with, where is it comfortable for you? Give your body a chance to adjust. I'm deliberately not bringing our arms into the movement at the moment, because all too often what will happen is, people are doing this, and then I say, and then let your arms follow, and they do this. The arms lead. Well, the very act of the arms leading will draw me forwards if I try to relax. And that tightness that builds up in the body quite unconsciously will spread through the rest of your body. So although it's nice to bring the arms into the movement and do the full exercise, actually this is a very useful exercise in and of its own right. Now, if you turn this movement, again, I'm going to come a little bit closer, turn this movement into a circular movement, and bear in mind I'm exaggerating, I'm going way too far, but I wanted to say, again, the pivot point is my ankles. I'm feeling my weight going around the edges of my feet. So across from toes to toes, down the outside edge of one foot, from the heel to the opposite heel, up the outside edge to there. Just as far as I can go without what you saw me do before. And again, this is going to be connected to the knees and hips softening to our pelvis, able to make the adjustment and so on and so forth. Make sure that you're not doing this, moving your head around. I'm not trying to move my head. The only reason my head is moving is because it would be really hard work to stop it moving. I mean, I could do it, but it's like I'd have to strain in my neck. So unfortunately, it's very hard to see this happening, which is why I'm doing it quite big. Bear in mind, I am doing this a little bit too much. So try going in the other direction. And you'll notice as I go across, see my knee, I'm not doing that. Now, if you are doing that, another thing to consider, and this is a very common problem, is we always think bigger is better, but it's not. Often the smaller movements are more useful to us. If I do a big movement, I'm inevitably going to pull the knee out of line and stumble over. But if I do a small movement into this leg, I can feel the slight stretch in there. I can feel those muscles engaging. And if they're not, then I can more easily make the adjustment if I need to. And then gradually just make it a smaller and smaller movement. So that's like water flowing down a plug hole in the sink. You eventually just arrive at what is for you your sort of central position for today. And you just come to rest. And you might want to consider that you want your weight just behind the balls of your feet, ideally. You might want to try that. So you come forwards a little bit more, let your hips drop back. But if you're thinking that's tight in your back, or it's not good for your knees, or you can't quite get that, go back to your original position, as I did a little bit earlier in this session. I think I'm probably more there now. So, and then for rooting down, the exercise rooting down, my hips go back. And that's important. It's my hips going back, not my knees going forwards. It's much harder work for your hips to go back, by the way, much harder in the muscles of your legs. So again, I try and do the movements quite big. And remember, I've been doing this for some time, so it's reasonable to expect that I could move a little bit further than some other people. Notice your hands going up and down because they're attached to your shoulders. So the movement is already there in your arms for you to create a shape out of. You just bring your hands together, push up, with your elbows being pushed out, turn over, and then easing down, hips releasing, shoulders releasing. The actual independent movement of my arms in this exercise is from about here, just below my shoulders, to about here, just above my navel. If I go any further, then things can start to go wrong. Again, this is a deliberately simple exercise at the start. Once we've established boundaries of movement, then we can begin to work with them to extend them. But first of all, we have to recognize where they are. the body expanding and contracting. Expanding and contracting. Try not to get competitive about how far your hands and your hips are moving. This is not a question of bending your knees more to root down. And one thing I've realized over the years when I've been teaching seated classes is I often get much better responses from people to rooting down in the seated classes, which, you know, if you think about it, is a bit counterintuitive. But the thing is, keep going. When we sit down, we've got the support from our chair, hopefully. And so around this area, the hips and the lower back, we automatically begin to let go because we're comfortable in the chair. If you've ever been, I don't know, in a cafe or a cinema or something like that, that has bad chairs, you'll know how difficult it is to actually relax. And rooting down really should be considered to be that releasing in your hips and your lower back rather than the knees bending. Your hips drop back and your knees soften, and they do bend, to allow that feeling rather than the other way around. So all of this is an ongoing task, shall we call it. Now change into the wild goose. As soon as we change one thing in our body, everything will change. So listening to your body, how your body is responding to any changes that you make is really important. If you were to look up somebody like Chen Manqing or, and any of the great players of this art who were lucky enough to have photographs or film of, you'll see that, if you could see Chen Manqing or Chen Xiaowang when they were 20, they would be doing the exercises in one way. If you could see them when they were 70, they'd be doing it in another way. It's quite simple. We change as we grow older and our understanding develops. Which is good. And then changing again. We may find it frustrating to begin with. When will I ever get this right? But after a while, you realize that prompting from your body is one of the things that really feeds into the meditational element in the art, keeps us constantly aware. And so there is always a part of us that is, if you like, centered, part of our awareness that is centered in our body. And because it's centered in our body, it's centered in this moment. So in that sense, if you're interested in things like mindfulness, that this self-awareness is a very useful tool in developing and maintaining that. Again and again, we come back to the quality, the feel of the movement. Some movements that will mean more to you than others. So now change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Remember, I've been talking about the weight of our arms. So we sink down, we draw our hand down, and just for a moment, we feel the weight of the arm, and then we move to the other side. Again, this is not a race, this is not a rush. Notice as your arm rises, if there's a point where things start to go wrong with your posture. And next time, just try moving a little less. See if you can find the point where that starts to happen. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So in these sessions, the movements that we do progress. I always start off with the same exercises, very straightforward exercises, and they gradually get a little bit more demanding. Do this one more time on each side. So these first 4 exercises are all front facing. We're not turning in the center of our body, so we've taken that potential sort of trap out. We are lifting our arms up, but we're being very careful about that. But now, when we go to pushing in 4 directions, we start to turn in the center. But first, the first and the last part of this exercise. So the idea of doing it this way, pushing out to the sides, is so that we can get a feel for what's happening in our upper body. Hips are still sinking back. Keep your hands in front of your body. And I would say probably the best part of your body to listen to is your back. But you might find it easier in the front. But I always think this feels a bit like my back's being massaged. And the push up is like somebody's stroking up and down my back. And the sideways push, like somebody's stroking across my back. And that massaging feeling isn't a bad sort of quality to file away in your memory. So when we start to turn, if we don't turn properly, so if we say sort of pushed up in the upper back, we'll instantly lose that feeling. We also note the feeling in our legs, because that's another one that we want to keep. And so when we turn, the only place we can really turn effectively from is here, the hips and the waist. Another problem here is that we can sometimes turn too far. I can adjust my legs all I like, but if I turn to here, I simply can't get my knee back in line. So it's not necessary to turn that far anyway to get the hands to move. It's quite a small movement. And we very quickly realize that the center of the body only has to make a very small movement, relatively speaking, to produce a great effect further out in the body. Center, hips and waist, be regarded as being like the hub of a bicycle wheel. You can turn the hub of a wheel very, very slightly. And if you watch the ends of the spokes near the rim, they radiate out from the hub. And they turn further than the hub itself. They move further than the hub itself does. Your arms are like the spokes. Your hands are like the bit where the spokes join the rim of the wheel. Now change into circling palms. Once again, the hand is slightly in front of the body. It's quite a strong movement in the shoulder, a nice open feeling through the side of your body. But feel what's happening between your hip and your shoulder. if it feels tight, if it feels really, if you're struggling with that, first of all, don't move your arm as far, but I would give serious consideration to not doing the turning. Which is why I always say if it's comfortable for you to do the turn. Because if you're already tight at that stage, the turning is going to add to your problems. But now, if it is comfortable, you can add the turn. Remember, it's quite small. It is within these parameters, shall we call them, that the energy will flow. We can go back the other way, and I would really emphasize that. So on the other side, because people want to get a sense for the energy of the movement, and what they do is they then wave their arms around. But watch what happens when I just strain in my arms. Oh, that's great. Look, I've just gone out of line really quickly. So moving the arms more may give you a feeling of more energy, but it will also create a blockage that will stop that energy flowing. So then add in the turn. So we've gone from, if you like, the mechanics of the postures and the movement into the energetics. They're not separate things. Now, just stand for a moment, check your posture. And I've stopped you here because the next two movements, while I get a drink, the next two movements involve a tilting movement, the shoulders going forwards. Your body's going to go out of line. So there's going to be rowing a boat and polishing the table. And again, to emphasize, this is not you leaning forwards. If I just do this, I'm now, I can feel the strain in my back already. It has to be done from the hips. That's the whole point of these exercises, to really show us the significance of the center part of the body. That's why I put rowing a boat into the sequence, and why I've added in more recently polishing the table, so that we can really feel how crucial this center part of the body, the lower dantian, really is. So sinking down, pushing up, feel the push up, moving your arms, and then hips, buttocks, lower back, going back, arms drop down, hips drop down, the pelvis levels off, and that draws your head and your shoulders up. There isn't a rule about how far your arms should be moving, because we're not trying to move our arms. And I think I said a couple of weeks ago, the question shouldn't be how far should I move my arms, but rather how far, when I do this in the hips, does it move my arms for me? And again, bear in mind that I am moving quite large movements. In doing so, I am actually disobeying my own rules, by the way. But I want you to see what I'm doing. The rule I'm disobeying is that as I said, my lower back seems to be a bit stiff. And so if I wasn't teaching, I might do this exercise, but I'd probably do it sort of like this a few times. But you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing then. So I mean, it's not, I'm not going to damage my back or anything, it's fine. And then from here, coming back up, rest your hands, polishing the table. Now we add the turn, and then the hips go back. Remember that smooth flowing quality of movement. Can you feel that in the palms of your hands and your fingertips? If not, trace the movement back. Where is the tightening? So long as you're moving in your hips and waist here in the correct way, where then is that flow of the movement being halted? Try a smaller movement. One more time. And then come back and stand. If you're facing your screen, whatever you're watching on, and you're parallel to it, then that's good. So sometimes, for instance, we're told, if I was standing like this, I would want to stand with my shoulders and my hips parallel to the wall in front of me. Toes pointing in that direction, or as I've said before, you can have your toes slightly turned out. We have some leeway in this, but when I say slightly, this is what I mean, not this. That's not slightly. So this is slightly, barely noticeable, unless you're one of my teachers who always seems to be able to spot it from the other side of the field. So when we change stance now, we turn one foot out, and that's an angle you can play about with. And when we step forwards towards that wall or towards the imaginary wall. So our toes going straight ahead. Let the weight sink down and just begin to slowly move the weight. Remember, 60% in the front leg, that's only 10% of your weight over half. So you've only moved 10% of your weight. Maybe 70% here. Move 20% of your weight from the middle. Notice where my knees go. So if you look at my front knee, it should stop there. That should be just above the ball of the foot. I don't want to be out there. Make sure you've got a long enough step. This will encourage this. So the dimensions of the step are the width of your step is the width of your hips. So that's from left to right. The length of your step is about the same to begin with, but for those of you more comfortable with the rooting down, you may find it a little bit longer. But this is no good because you've got hardly any room there. You'll start to strain, you'll start to stiffen. Now, if you have trouble with that, and as we get older, we often find ourselves taking shorter steps. So this might feel uncomfortable because you're really sort of like causing the muscles to really work harder than normal. Just work on the posture, and that may make you feel a bit unstable as well, because suddenly everything's tightening up. There's the wall for your support, and you can gradually learn to do this, and you work on this posture so that you can see the space between my heel and my toes. Another thing about this is the movement comes from the feet, not from your shoulders. Try not to go up and down. Now, going back to the relationship between the angle of your upper body and the angle in particular of the back knee, because the back foot is turned out, then it's very easy for the knee to do this. Can you see how it's twisted over? Once again, the remedy would be that rotation outwards. But that may be too much for you at the moment, in which case, I think it's okay for your body to be at a slight angle. Don't artificially wrench this part of the body around. You might end up twisting your legs up. You might end up twisting your back up. Again, this is the ideal posture if it's comfortable and if it's not twisting your back and your knee. So we want to work towards this, but don't sacrifice your knee or your back for perfect posture, this is okay. You're not going to do yourself any harm by doing this. You'll just need to work at correcting it over a period of time. I don't believe it's true that it's easier to make corrections right at the beginning, because sometimes our attention needs to be elsewhere, and also because of just how strong these movements are and the length of time it takes for the body to actually adjust. You might put yourself in this posture a couple of times, but you'll slip back into that. Don't keep correcting it, because you'll reach a point where that physical conditioning has gone as far as it can do at this point. Then beginning to raise your toes and your heel. And when I talk about physical conditioning, I'm not just talking about the big muscles like the quadriceps and biceps and triceps. I'm talking about the little muscles between your vertebrae, the tendons, the ligaments, what is sometimes referred to as the skeletal muscles or the postural muscles. I'm talking about the fascia, muscle skin. All of this takes time and practice to build. And then stepping in. You want to get into the habit of stepping into the right place. Back and out, keeping the width of your step. So this becomes a bit of a kind of circular movement. And I do have my front foot turned out here for the weight to go down more. And then on the other side, so line yourself up as best you can. It will feel different on this side. It may be that on the last one you think, oh yeah, I've got that right, whereas here it doesn't feel quite there. Another thing to put against all of this is, and I've mentioned this before, and again something we can get from that very first exercise, is that this posture creates a sense of space in the body. Space for the muscles to move, for the blood to flow, for the energy to flow. And when we start to restrict that space, then we need to think carefully about what we're doing physically. So the flow of the movement, when we start to get a sense for that, is a useful indicator that things are going okay. And when it doesn't flow, that's when we come back to that analysis of, is the knee okay, what's happening with the legs, and so on and so forth. Raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. And take a few steps through if you're comfortable with that. Take your time. And then pushing back. Good. And shake out. I think probably ever since we started bouncing around in trees, however many millions of years ago, our hands, which were formerly our front paws, have become dominant. Understandably so, really, because we were hanging on to the branches, I guess. Because of that, we tend to gravitate towards moving our arms first. So when we do something like fisherman cast a net, it's very, very common for this to happen rather than this, the weight moving. You won't get the same quality of movement, but you probably won't notice that. But what can happen is you get pulled over very, very easily. So how we do for time? So move your weight back. My arm is hanging down past my hip here. I turn the palm of my hand forwards. I do the same thing on the other side. And then as I move my weight forwards, I rotate my arm. But notice it's still hanging down. It hasn't gone here and it's not going to go there. I go forwards and backwards, getting a great deal of movement, a great deal of energy in my arms. And what I'm actually doing with my arms is rotating in the shoulder. And even that actually has a lot to do with what's happening in my chest and my upper back. So to get that sense of flow and energy in my arms, I don't have to do very much with them at all. So this is a useful exercise. Bird folds its wings. And then to make the transition into fisherman cast a net, here the image of being in water is your friend, because your body moves but your arms get held back. But then that energy, that flow kicks in and brings them back. By now you're going forwards and then the arms follow. So it's hips, then shoulders, then elbows, then wrists, then fingers. Fisherman cast a net. This sequence of movements, feet to hips, to shoulders, to elbows, to wrists, to fingers, is consistent through all of the movements. One more time. So these two exercises are really good exercises as preparation for the more complex exercises that we quite often do. Because again, they train you in a certain awareness. So now try that with your other foot forwards. Check your stance. Don't just go, oh, right, he's going to do this one. It's like, are my feet in the right place? I don't know. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. And then now bird folds its wings. You may notice, and the observant amongst you have noticed, I hope, both online and in face-to-face classes, I'm talking to a class, I'm teaching and things like that. And you may see me do something like, I'll just show you, I come back and I just move my foot because I've been talking to you, I've been trying to teach, seeing what you're doing. And so my attention is not fully in my body, which has there are advantages to that. But from your point of view, all you really need at this point is to have your attention in your body. And the adjustments that I make are often just quite automatic. I sometimes notice, I'm doing an exercise and my foot will change angle or something like that. So it's as though our bodies develop their own sense of awareness, their own sense of wisdom. And then change into fisherman cast net. Remember, ankles, knees and hips, shoulders, elbows and wrists, major joints of your body. are the spaces between your bones, like the hinges of the body. You want them to feel loose, and you want them to feel supported. And by and large, a major part of that support is going to come from the muscles of your legs, not for the knees, the muscles of your shoulders and your arms, obviously, but the upper body. Good. And then good. Now, just rubbing your hands together. And then with the pads of your fingers, tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Arm. The side. Then onto your back. Around your hips. Legs. Nice and light on your belly. And the upper part of the chest. To embrace tiger return to the mountain. In many ways, this brings us back to some of those fundamental qualities. I've talked about this image of the mountain and it's centered and quiet and so on and so forth, that sense of the rooting down. But also, when we get into this position, this is the template, if you like, for all the movements that we do, but also the template for what we want in our daily lives. So in that way as well, embrace tiger return to the mountain brings us back to something very, very fundamental about the Tai Chi practice. So sinking down, just pushing up, and notice whether you're able not so much to force yourself into the posture, which you should never do, but to simply allow your body to take the shape. It is, after all, seen from one perspective, very, very simple. Simply bring your body into line with the pull of gravity, so gravity isn't causing a strain anywhere. Gravity is all around you and inside you. Your body's there, so you have everything that you need. And the main attribute, the main quality we want to bring into this is a willingness to yield, to once again allow that movement of gravity, free passage through our body into our feet, into the ground beneath us. And then we get the reverse of that, the push up from the ground, that sense of movement of energy, expanding upwards and outwards, just dissipating and returning. One more time. And stand. Check out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. Remember, I think somewhere on YouTube, and if you can't find it, give me a shout, but there's still some film I did a year or so ago, giving more detail of posture, basically saying the same things. I'm sure I've been saying today. And as always, feel free to get in touch with me with any questions.